Hi guys, and welcome to part 2 of week 3's lecture for Exercise Science 230. So in this video here we are going to look and focus mainly on the forms of teaching, which is demonstration and verbal instruction. And the first thing we look at when we're trying to describe this is the questions always asked, well, which form of teaching is best? So that's the slide we're at to start with. It's got a picture of a bloke in his tennis shirt. And this is a video I normally play in class, and it's an expert of a tennis coach in the States. And he's just trying to describe the tennis serve. But the reason why I show this video is because he gives so much information in a 90-second video. I know it's for a YouTube clip, whatever it might be, and he's trying to explain it with a video. But there's just far too much information in there. And so the key of demonstration is this. When someone is actually demonstrating the skill, as soon as you're demonstrating, the student or the learner is watching what you're doing. And so because they're watching what you're doing, they are already problem solving. They're already thinking about how you're doing, how they're going to approach it. So they're already active in the learning process. So when we do give a demonstration, it's important not to overdo the instruction with it. And you know yourself as well, when someone's giving you a demonstration and they're talking about the demonstration all the time, it actually can get quite annoying because it's getting in the way of you trying to just focus on what you're watching with the demo. So a lot of times teachers or instructors will stop the demo halfway through and explain what they're going to do, then do it again, explain it again, and it loses its rhythm a bit. So the first one, what we know is the power of demonstration is it gets the person active straight away and engages them in what they're doing. So what the key to demonstration is telling them the context the skill needs to be performed in. So giving them a reason to focus on. So that's demonstration. The next form of teaching we look at in this particular video as well is verbal instruction. So that's when we actually verbalise what you're doing and how you're doing it and the things to focus on, and we speak later about verbal cues. So in this particular slide here, what we're trying to say is, well, it's a combination of demonstration and verbal instruction lead to what we call the optimal teaching model. So let's look at what demonstration is again. So it's going through what I just said before. So it's also called modelling, and it's also referred to observational learning. So at a slide now where it's got a picture of demonstration examples, a figure I should say, not a picture. And the first one is used the word demonstration and describes as, like I said, modelling or observational learning. And it's also described secondly as the ability of the learner observing someone else perform the skill when it is more effective. And just some examples as well as when it's more effective as well. And I've used this example here of statistics, computers and directions. So a lot of times, you know, when someone's giving you directions and you're just trying to listen to them, after they've given you maybe the first or the second direction, if they're just giving it to you verbally, you actually forget what they're trying to say and you go on towards, focus on something else. But if someone actually draws you a picture, so drawing a picture is like a demonstration. It's showing you a visual representation where you've maybe got something to fall back on, or you engage with them differently. So let's just look at the power of demonstration. Now, this is the real key thing, pardon me, I want you to focus on when we're talking about what we're looking at. So I said to you before that demonstration is also called modelling, so modelling best practice, or observational learning. The person is actually watching you, they're watching what you're doing. But this is what they're looking at. The next slide I'm looking at here is it's got the figure with demonstration, the circle in the middle, and it's got 5 outer circles around it. And the key circle we look at is the one at the top called invariant features. So they're looking at things, they're actually looking at the interaction of your limbs in time and space. They're not just looking at your elbow, whether it's flexing or the wrist, they're looking at how your elbow interacts with your trunk or with your head or the legs, whatever it might be. They're looking at your body as one particular unit. So that means when we demonstrate, try not to focus on look at my elbow, look at my wrist, because that will actually distract the learner. They're actually looking at a deep subconscious level of the actual skill. So you need to give them time to actually look at it and see it, because that's what they look at. And an example here might be that you've got a friend that's 100 metres away walking. Now, you can't see their face, but because of the way they walk, they've got a unique style, you know who it is. But you can't see the fine detail, but you know the big picture of how they work in their movement pattern. And that's sort of subconscious, sort of deeper learning that we know. So that's where demonstration is. We look at the role of vision. We look at these invariant features, which I'll explain a little bit more in weeks 4 and 5. And also too, demonstration is best for learning a new movement pattern. So if you're working with novices, demonstrations are absolutely essential at that first part of learning. Now, first of all, demonstrations need to be performed correctly. That's the next slide we're looking at. But you might say, well, that sounds pretty obvious, but it's not always done that way. A lot of times too, people don't demonstrate correctly at all. It also says, point number 2 here, the observer also perceives information about the strategy used by the model to solve the problem, because that's what you're really trying to do. As soon as I'm watching you demonstrate the skill, I'm trying to come up with an approach that I want to try to engage in so I can actually do the skill properly. So there's a lot goes into that demonstration process. Now the next slide we look at is, can novices benefit from observing other novices? Now in this slide here I normally show a couple of videos on skiers, or I show a couple of videos on cup stacking like I did in week 2. And it looks at a novice learning from a novice, as well as looking at a professional person or a person that's I guess can do the skill quite well. But the thing is too, you can learn a lot from watching other novices perform the skill, because you can see the errors that they're making, and then you can come up with different ways that you think might solve that problem as well. It also, in this slide, actually says it discourages imitation, and that's another real key thing that you'll hopefully learn from this particular unit. And that's this point here. We're at the Olympic Games here, so it's a great time to look at it and look at all the different sports if you can, and just really watch what they're doing. Because if you get the top 10 people in any particular sport, they're all going to do the movement differently. And I don't care if you're breaststroke swimming, or you're running the marathon, or you're throwing a javelin, they'll all have a unique way of doing it. So therefore there's not one way of doing a particular skill. You need to encourage people to develop their own unique learning style and their own unique pattern of movement. So therefore we don't want people to imitate, right, the professional. We want them to pick up on what they're doing. So you can actually get a lot from learning from novices, because you pick up on those errors. And then it encourages the person to be more active in the learning process, because they're trying to solve the problem as well. So it's a really great way of trying to help people by demonstrating, by getting other novices perform the skill as well. Okay, the next slide we look at the timing and frequency of demonstrating a skill. So the key here is how often and how frequent. Right, and this is a real challenge, because there's no right answer of one way or the other. But we do know if we can intermittently present demonstrations every now and then throughout the first few training sessions, it's going to be really helpful. And we should try to demonstrate anytime we're doing something new, or anytime we're actually trying something different as well. And a key would be there, if you're trying a new drill at a football training session, show it. Demonstrate it. Don't try to give verbal instructions, because I guarantee they'll do it completely wrong. You need to demonstrate the actual skill. So it's a really powerful term, and especially too, if you use demonstration, you don't have to use as many words, you don't have to use as much information, and therefore it's what we call less contextual. Because remember, they're in that cognitive stage of learning. So they're already thinking, they're already overloaded. So we don't want to overload them with more information, we want to try to give them less. So a demonstration is a great way of actually giving them information without overloading them as well. And then the instructor will use their sort of, I guess, knowledge and experience to know how often and how frequent they should demonstrate. But early in practice, I'd say more often, and as they're getting better at the skill, I would say you need to use demonstration less and less, unless, like I said, they're actually learning a new drill or a new aspect of the skill that you actually need to show them. Okay, so there's 2 theories that look at observational learning and how they influence. Now, the reason why I'm bringing up these 2 theories is you don't need to know these 2 theories. Okay, the first one's called the cognitive mediation theory, and the second one's called the dynamical view of modelling. All that I use these 2 slides is to show you is, in week 1 I talked about the theories of motor control, and some people come from motor programs theory, which is very hierarchical, and I said very sort of linear, very structured, very memory based. So therefore the cognitive mediation theory would come under that motor programs theory. Right, so just showing you that, where the second one, the dynamical view of modelling, comes under more those dynamical systems of learning. So I'm just showing you here how even something like demonstration, people look at different ways of why they think it actually works. So it's a nice way, if you read through just those slides, you can see how people look at things differently. The dynamical view of modelling looks at how you interact with the environment, whereas the mediation theory looks basically at, again, a memory-based or a symbolic sort of memory-based system. So they coincide very much with motor programs and dynamical systems theory. And it says which theory is correct? Well, it depends who you ask. So the jury's still out. Now, the next two slides I'm showing you here, the first one's called a slalom skier. And that was looking at whether people were giving feedback on demonstration and whether or not people learnt more from discovery learning. This is over 3 days of practice. And the next slide looks at a point-light technique. And normally if I click on that particular slide, you can see the person walking on their biomechanical markers. Now you can't see the picture or the face of that person, but if you knew that person, you'd be able to tell that that's their unique walking style. Because what these two slides do tell us is we look at what we call those invariant features of the skill more so than just individual joints or individual elements of a particular skill. Okay, so that's the first part we looked at, which is demonstration. The second part we look at is what we call verbal instructions and verbal cues. So it says here, verbal instructions rank with demonstrations a commonly used means of communicating how to perform motor skills, and so we know that. So verbal instructions. Now, the familiarity of the skill being taught is as an asset, and what I normally do here is I normally give you 2 activities. And what I normally do is I get someone in class to stand up, and someone is the instructor and someone is the learner. And I get you to actually tell someone how to tie their shoelace up. Now, we've been tying our shoelaces up for quite a number of years, hopefully, but to actually do it through verbal instruction is actually quite hard to do. So maybe in the labs this week, or if you get some time this week as well, you might want to have a go at actually instructing your friend on how to tie their shoelaces, but you can only do what your friend actually says to do, and you'll find it's quite hard to do. Now, the real key to verbal instructions is not to give too much information. Right? If you have too much information, and the example I used in that tennis serve slide, the first slide I showed of this particular, slide of this particular lecture, So if you look at that there and you watch the video, he uses a lot of information at 90 seconds. So verbal instructions are really the really important asset, but they can be overused and give too much information. So that's where we go to verbal cues. So verbal cues are short, concise phrases that directs the learner's attention to the necessary information. So an example in this particular diagram I use here is skiers can be feet forward, because in skiing it's a tendency to try to lean back down the mountain, so you need to actually lean into the mountain and lean forward. So that could be there. It needs to be, like I said, concise phrases. And one of these aspects I like about this diagram, it provides a stronger cognitive representation. So an example I use of verbal cues. Back when I was trying to do triathlons, and I use the word trying, you saw me swim, it's very much trying. So I wasn't a very good swimmer at all. But I remember the coach telling me, right, that when I was trying to catch the water and doing freestyle, if you see my arm there, is I would just sort of pull back. I wouldn't really get the water, catch it first and then pull back. So I was definitely just pulling back. So what the coach got me to do is he said, pretend there's a bucket of water that you have to get your arm and elbow over first, like this, and then you sort of pull all the way back. So that was a really good way of trying to get in my head a bucket of water that I've got to get my arm and elbow over before I pull back. So I'm actually trying to pull that bucket of water back. So that was a really strong verbal cue, which created a picture in my head, so therefore it's less cognitive, because we know a picture tells 1,000 words. So if you can use a verbal cue to try to create a picture in the learner's head, it decreases the amount of information they need to take in, therefore it's really effective to get to remember the focus on, draw your attention to the necessary information you're trying to tell them. So again, an example might be in basketball, they use the cookie jar. So you try to actually put your hand in the cookie jar. Classic example. In cricket, for me, it was rub your ear with your arm, so rub your ear. So that was another thing there to keep your arm to go straight. So there's heaps of different verbal cues you might have known from your sporting days, or you might currently use now. But they're used as short, concise phrases and to draw that necessary information or attention to the information you're trying to tell them. Now the next slide just tells you exactly what I've just said there. Brevity, they need to be short and concise, and they need to be accurate. It means they need to draw that attention to the necessary information. So the next slide I'm looking at now is what they call implementing verbal cues. And the key here is you need to know your skill really well. You need to know what are the key aspects of your skill, and that's in your skills training project, right, your STP. in that first section, I asked you to go and research your skill. So you really need to know the key aspects of your skill. And if you do, then you know the verbal cues to focus on, which parts of the cue of the skill you need to focus on, and therefore which verbal cues you need to use and what you want to direct them to. So it's really important here. This slide basically tells us that we need to know our skill really well. Okay, because it says here, novice should be given the opportunity to observe a competent demonstrator while the teacher draws attention to the key elements of the movement. Right, so it's really important that you know your skill. Now also too, timing of verbal cues, again, probably more early on in practice and then less, right, as they get a little bit more competent, because we want them to still be active in the learning process. We don't just want them to be relying on the information that we're giving them, all right? So the next slide here says implementing verbal cues, and I love this slide because it says a picture tells 1,000 words. So if you look at it straight away, some people see a vase or a vase, depends on which part of Australia you're from, and other people like to see two faces looking at each other. So again, too, it depends on what you're looking at. So a picture tells 1,000 words, but even then we can look at the same thing and see different things. So really, that summarises our next, that part 2 of this lecture of week 3. And really the key take-home points here are looking at the power of demonstration of verbal cues, looking at not giving people too much information, knowing your skill really well and drawing people to those really important parts of the skill that you want them to focus on depending on which stage of learning they're at, and also too to make sure that you demonstrate novices as well as well-trained participants, because we want the learner to be active in the learning process. We don't want them to be passive and just relying upon you. So again, hopefully that's helped you in understanding demonstration verbal instructions, and that will help you in that next phase of designing your skills training program. So in your week 4 program, I would like to see you implement strategies that you're going to use to actually provide demonstration and what kind of verbal cues you're going to use. So the key thing here is, before I stop this lecture, is if you know your skill really well and you know the key aspects of your skill that you're going to teach and focus on for those 4 weeks, then your verbal cues should be directly related to those key aspects. And also too, when you measure performance, you should be measuring movement outcomes or qualitative or quantitative tests based on those key aspects of the skill. So go back through, if you know your key aspects, you know what you're going to measure, and you know the verbal cues you're going to use to encourage that sort of optimal learning environment. Alright guys, thanks for that, and part 3 will be on explicit and implicit learning.